Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming back to the last session of the China panel. This is the second panel. Our theme today is state capacity and industrial policy. We have 4 papers on schedule. We are waiting for one presenter, Rafael Moura. His paper's title is State Capabilities Along the Chinese Development Trajectory under Jiang Zemin. Revisiting the reconfiguration of institutional guidelines, the political context, and the debate on interpretations regarding the 1990s. Second paper is going to be presented by Mattia. He is here today. His paper's title is Industrial Policy and Sectoral Priorities in China, Analyzing the Strategic Presence of Government in Key Industries. Third paper is going to be presented by Cintia. She's online today. Her paper, she co-authored with 2 other people. That paper is Chinese Innovation Ecosystem, Economic and Competitiveness Planning, Projectment. The last paper is going to be presented by Sudan, Zhao Sudan. She is from the Sichuan University. Her paper title may have changed a bit, but what I have here is from industrial policy to industrial chain policy. So without further delay, I will ask Mattia if you can come forward to do your presentation. And when you do it, just make sure that you share the PowerPoint so that online attendees can see as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for coming to this section.
I think it hasn't shared yet, so we.
Oh, sorry.
Yes. Share. Yeah. You guys can see the screen, isn't it? Cintia, can you see the slides? Yeah, great. Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, thank you. I'm going to talk about industrial policy in China and topic related to the strategic presence of government in key industries. And this paper is a part of a research line developed with Francesca Spigarelli, Elisa Barbieri, and Marco Di Tommaso on generally on industrial policy in several countries and a comparison between several approach to industrial policy around the world. And this paper obviously is focused on Chinese approach to industrial policy. The main points of the presentation, first of all, I'm going to talk to give you some insight on the industrial policy debate. It's quite a tricky debate and industrial policy is a quite tricky topic in international debate since from the neoliberal rhetoric now we have a sort of return of industrial policy around the world, including, for instance, in the US, where the neoliberal approach has been dominant, at least in the rhetoric of the government. And the causes are, first of all, the 2008 crisis, then the protectionism approach of Donald Trump, the COVID, and now the geopolitical disorder that pushed for the adoption of specific action of industrial policy oriented to promote structural change and the industrial development of the national states. And the result, the consequence is the emerging around the world of blocks that basically compete for developing their industrial base, and the result is a new international division of labor fostered by the government intervention. in the US, China, Europe, with a specific plan, with a specific industrial policy plan. Then I'm going to talk about the Chinese approach to industrial policy. Is a particular approach, that of the Chinese government, since we have a capitalism with the Chinese characteristics, in which the government implements policies characterized by a clear strategic vision through several politics and several policies and strategies, including the new normal, the Made in China 2025, the Belt and Road Initiative, the dual circulation strategy, and common prosperity. There is the fact of the promotion of few state actors, few state-owned enterprises that limit the international competition in specific strategic sectors of the Chinese economy. And thirdly, I'm going to present a very simple exercise, an empirical investigation on what are the industries characterized by, the main question of this part is, what are the industries characterized by higher intensity of government presence in the Chinese economy? And I'm going to propose a government presence intensity index to show what are the most relevant industries for the government in the Chinese economy. So industrial policy debate, what is industrial policy? It's a quite simple question, not so simple according to the literature, since there are some controversial issues around the definition of industrial policy. It's generally concerned on the government intervention aiming to modify the economic structure, including sector industries firms that deserve to be promoted in order to promote strategic goals and to promote the interest of the economy and the society. May be useful to recall the definition of Cimolidozzi and Stiglitz. That is a quite broad definition of industrial policy that comprise policy affecting infant industries, but also trade policy, science and technology policies, public procurement, policy affecting FDI, intellectual property rights, and so on. There is a sort of institutional engineering that means that the government, like a manager of a particular business, put its hand to strategically manage the sector and the enterprises in the economy for particular purpose. What are these proposals? What are the goals of the industrial policy intervention? It could be correcting market failures, such as public good, externalities, non-competitive market, and information asymmetries. It is a quite dominant literature that justify industrial policy interventions, theoretically at least. There are also meta-economic goals that could be promoted through industrial policy intervention. Meta-economic means social goals related to, for example, quality of life of the population, through picking as a winners the education, health, or environmental priorities, not related just to economic growth and market efficiency, but also to equity and generally better life. In the case of China, it's extremely important to recognize the strategic perspective of the government in implementing industrial policy. What is the strategic perspective? Is related to the project of structural change of the national or local economy for promoting competitiveness in the international market, industrial growth, or independence related to the economic sphere, and the industrial policy action in this case aims to change the qualitative and quantitative nature, the qualitative feature of the sector or other components of the system. The main feature of the strategic intervention is a dynamic perspective. That means a long vision of the government on the conformation of the industrial structures that it has to be promoted. Think about the Chinese 5 years plan that steadily are promoting a specific sector with a long-term vision. And another characteristic is the selective or vertical approach. That means to pick specific segments or target in the economy that deserve to be promoted despite the other sectors and targets for strategic reasons. Basically, what industrial policy, what are the pros and cons of industrial policy respect to the free market theory? The pros are related to the development of a national productive system able to create employment and income, basically reduce the competitive pressure for the national enterprises, and more stable standard of life, since there is no contraction of wages and worker rights under the competition, under the international competition. On the other hand, we have restricting imports through that generates higher prices, lower quality of products, and generally less choice for the consumers. There is a systemic protectionism generally, since when you acquire a sort of protectionism law for particular actors and enterprises, it's extremely difficult to remove the protection, and lack of incentive to improve efficiency, since the actor of the economy could be incentive to doesn't invest in, they do not invest in innovation, basically, for increasing their competitiveness and so on. What is the peculiarity of industrial policy in China is the ability to manage these two levels. We need a compromise between industrial policy and free markets, given these pros and cons. And China is, according to me, quite relevant also for the ability to reach this compromise and to manage the free market along with industrial policy intervention. The second point is related of this presentation is related to the specific case of industrial policy in China. Industrial policy in China has a long tradition, starting to the first plans in 1980s with the open door policy. There was a gradual opening to FDI, a specific action on the geography of production with a specialized economic zone and export-oriented strategy. But on the other hand, despite this liberalization, gradual liberalization process, we have the government that continued to pose specific conditions to foreign investors and to privilege some specific sector for promoting structural change in high value added industries. And related to the specific topic of this presentation, we have still an important role of the state-owned enterprises that were reformed and privatized, but the government continues also today to maintain a strict control over these enterprises to manage the economy in a strategic way, basically. More recently, we have in China a dual circulation strategy, basically following the Trump protectionism that has required a sort of necessity for China to exploit the internal demand. And so the dual circulation strategy is based on is an attempt of China to orient the economy, to make the domestic economy self-sufficient from the rest of the world in terms, for instance, of natural resources and technology, but at the same way boosting external demand, in particular through the Belt and Road Initiative. In a sense, the dual circulation strategy is a part of China's master plan to become self-reliant in terms of resource and technology. This is extremely important to understand the current industrial policy in China that is an attempt to become self-reliant, basically. What are the main tools of industrial policy in China? First of all, the 5 years plans, and then FDI policies with a list of banned industries of product to foreign production, and a specific role of joint venture for technology transfer. This was a traditional instrument for the government to develop a national industrial structure, governing the geography of production through special economic zone, development zone, specialized town, and so on. And as I told before, the role of state-owned enterprises. I'm not going to enter the details, but the national state-owned champions were privatized, but now the government is still maintaining the control, investing enormously in these enterprises. Think about the fact that the number of state-owned enterprises in China, in the top 5 economic groups in the world based on turnover, is increasing over time, and this is a signal that these kind of enterprises, these state-owned enterprises, are increasing their relevance as a champion in the international economy. Okay, the last point I'm going to present is related to our exercise, the empirical investigation. Basically, the research question is, okay, the state-owned enterprises are still relevant in the development process of China, but what are the industries characterized by higher intensity of government presence, especially with regard to the presence of state-owned enterprises? So in this paper, we build basically a government presence intensity index that is an index which synthesizes the value of different sectoral variables, and I'm going to show later which variables, and provide a sort of ranking of industries according to the level of intensity of government presence. The methodology is quite simple. It's a methodology of building composite indicators, and they are quite common. The main quality of this methodology is that is useful to describe a complex phenomenon, including, for instance, the strategic presence of the government. What really means the presence of government? We need to describe this kind of action from a broader perspective, and this includes to check for several variables, and we aim to identify specific variables to describe the presence of the government in the industries, and in particular we use the number of state-owned enterprises, the total asset of these enterprises, business revenues, total profits, and the annual average employees of the state-owned enterprises by sectors. And we combine these 5 variables through different combining functions that are these 4 different combining functions. The methodology also applies a sort of uncertainty analysis to show what is the result of the ranking in case you change the combining function, basically to check the robustness of the ranking. And the result show the list of the industries where the government is investing and where the government presence is higher compared to the other industries. And we have obviously some specific industries related to the high value-added sectors and endowed with a particular strategic significance. For instance, we have the production and distribution of electric power, the industries related to transport equipment, mining, related to metals, chemicals, oil, and so on, computers. In these industries, the government is still, according to this composite indicator, is still maintaining the control of the economy. This is the same result with the band that describe the robustness of the position in the ranking of these industries. And this shows the same ranking over time and the evolution over time. At the first position, stably, we have the production and distribution of electric power and power. Generally, we have that the strategic presence of the government is still important in some high value-added industries, and despite the liberalization process in China, the government continues to focus the attention on this specific sector. The objective, the goals of the government is basically the new normal. That means to portray a moderate economic growth oriented to sustainability, and to foster an economic structure characterized by higher value-added industries, but also equity, at least in the rhetoric of the common prosperity. The pandemic and geopolitical context still push for a dual circulation strategy. The main challenge of this dual circulation strategy is the technological autarky that requires the ability of China to provide the technology without importing that from abroad. But the question is, will China be able to make the transition from an economy at the service of the other nation to an economic system capable of responding to the demand for equity and quality of the internal and domestic population? The Chinese experience basically showed that industrial policy as a general prescription can be a viable tool for promoting long-term change of economic and social system, even if this process is definitely not utility for China at this stage. Thank you very much. Welcome.
Very good. I'd like to discuss further.
I'm
ask you some
closing.
questions. Yeah. Doing that. Okay, Cynthia, if you're ready, please feel free to unmute yourself and share your screen. You're still on mute at the moment. Okay, great.
Okay, I will try. Let me try. Okay.
Perfect.
You see?
Thank you. Yes.
Okay. My English is not good, but I will try. This research is in the first beginning. I'm working with Vitor Vieira Boanova from Brazil also, and with Sandro Bazzanella. We come from 3 different institutions, but we're trying to understand the Chinese innovation ecosystem, and in a sense that we can understand this as an economic and competitiveness planning and projectment. And the idea of projectment, I will tell a little bit more later, but it's came from a Brazilian economist and named Rangel, Ignacio Rangel. Well, this is a theoretical and conceptual research, and we're trying to analyze the social spatial formation presented in China and its insertion in the global division of labor, thinking about how can China work with ideas that came from planification, involve the development, the debate, and the projectment ideas. I am a teacher in Brazil. I teach development, regional development, and I am studying development for so long. And in Brazil, we have lots of critical ideas about development, and we seem to understand that in China, different instruments are being used for the government to understand how the development based in ideas of planification can go further than just one utopic horizon, like we say that this is the most common ideas in Brazil. So we are trying to understand the instruments of social spatial formation under this kind of analysis, how Chinese innovation system and the projectment concept can support a real idea of development. So we understand that China, and we are watching, like you probably know more than we, that China rises in the global system of economic and social and technology and all this kind of improvements they had in this less than 100 years. And this growth, which took place through profound changes in the rationalization of political, social, and economic organization, has been studied by researchers around the world who seek to understand the complexity of what is being built with so many indicators that point these improvements in the country's social, productive, and economic organization. And this is why we are here to try to understand a little bit more about Chinese social and economic organization. Well, we know, and we are studying here as a theoretical and conceptual research, we are studying how the planification ideas has to do with this development and how they can use and go further the planification ideas and how these strategic changes was occurring in the communist parties and how they control points to expansion and diversification of production, especially encouraged by scientific, technological, and productive innovations. So how does this happen? Development and planification ideas has to do with this support understanding. We understand that it has to do with institution, it has to do with economic decisions, of course, political decisions, but it has to do also with the concept, the ideas that they have that are structuring their activities. So, what is the signature of these ideas, of these concepts? What are the story of the operation on planification policies? So the historical perspective is very important for us in this research, especially because we are comparing to Brazilians' ideas of development and competitiveness. So the projectment concept seems to support this understanding, and the robustness of the systematization on a national innovation system has to do with the support for projectment to be possible in this new kind of development concept. Well, so what is projectment? In this Brazilian economist idea, projectment has to. Hi, are you there?
Yeah, sorry, it's just the flight.
Okay.
Continue, yeah.
Okay. So Rangel is a Brazilian economist, and he's not alive anymore, but he used to think that the historical process to create big projects and big investments as a central act in the economies is one of the greatest instruments that you can have to transform your society. So in this idea, economists and engineers are central or are fundamental persons or professionals in this sense of intervention from state. So economy has to do with big projects, and economy has to do with big constructions of public benefits. It has to do with big accounts. It has to do of reason as the biggest instrument to do politic and to think about how you can organize your society. So here we think that it has to do with the planifications come from Stalin and other guys' ideas. So for us, seems to projectment has to do with go further in the planification, and also projectment has to do go further from an idea or a utopic idea of development. because historically what we have to think about development are like guides and some like disconnected ideas about how we can develop our societies. And in projectment, it seems to have more like more concrete idea so about how to proceed. And so for us, projectment has to do with the Chinese. It seems to have related ideas about what China is doing in their society and go further in the idea of Hangel because in China they have more investment in big projects in their country and abroad. So it's they are going further the idea of projectment. It's more sophisticated than projectment, and seems to have a big. So they gather space to act because they are now offering these big projects around the world. And in this case, if they are thinking this is something that I want to study more. It's like I said, we are in the beginning of our research. If they're thinking very deeply, considering renewable energy, so they are going further again because they are seeking for the future or the future of big projectment of big projects. Well, so this interests us for because it can shows how rationality is on a function of the social spatial formation through the systematization of innovation and projectment, and it has reflexes and spillovers in several sectors. We have two or three important examples to talk about this idea, how projectment and innovation are gathering in this idea of China. So China is thinking about the energy matrix, especially the sources of renewable resources in its plans, programs, and structures, make up the national system of technological innovation, considering that innovation seems to be a fundamental element to support the rationalization of state planning. The second example is regional and urban planning and its consequences in urban and social organization, and how investments in innovation deeply impact Chinese urban formations and consequently also spill over to other countries through partnerships for mobility and infrastructure. So we have here some examples, some data from Vitor. Vitor is studying more this subject about how high-speed rails can impact on urban and regional formations. And it has to do with this idea of big projects, of how big projects can support their economy and can support their economy to go to other countries. So we know that China have big projects with other countries like Thailand, Laos, and the Belt and Road Initiative. So we have a little bit more about this idea and how they go further, not only thinking about the technical support, but they are thinking about a city cluster formation. So it has to be, they have to have a lot of institutions, a lot of professionals, a lot of technical skills, and a lot of political ideas and concepts to think about how this complex technical structure can support an idea like to coordinate development in their country and abroad. So here, Vitor got some data from from high-speed railway line and how the investments in the world are different and much bigger in China. So here we have a high-speed rail network in China. And also, just to show you that we are in the beginning of this research, but trying to understand the historical institutions and ideas connected to different institutions in China, to understand how they built their ecosystem, their innovation ecosystem, and what were the projects, what were the concepts in these different institutions, and some ideas that also connected to the different plans, like the different quinquennial plans, and what we can see in all these documents, in all these institutions, like their objectives in different programs or in different governments, and how they think about the concept of innovation, and what were they thinking when they create their programs, Torch program, 863 program. And we don't have much to tell like results, but we can tell that this is very interesting because it seems to confirm the ideas that, like Elia Jabor and his friends Wallace Moreira, they are trying to understand how they are creating a big structure, thinking about concepts, and considering reason as very important to understand their demands, to understand how can they change their society, and how can they impact in other countries. So it seems to be right to think about projectment, and it seems to but they seem to go further with all this planning. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. Very interesting on this planning subject. The last paper we have is from Sudan Zhao. Is a bit different from what you see on the program. Her subject is on the land reforms in China. The full title is Heterogeneous Effect of Rural-Urban Migration and Migrant Earnings on Land Efficiency, Empirical Evidence from China. Sudan, you can get your PowerPoint here. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Sandro, and I'm very glad to be here to give my presentation. And my topic is a heterogeneous effect of rural-urban migration and migrant earnings on land efficiency, and with empirical evidence from China. Here's an outline. First is an introduction. China has experienced the largest and fastest urbanization in the world. The urbanization rate has experienced an increase from around 18 to like 60% in the past 40 years. So it has been having a profound impact on the development of the country, especially the agriculture, because the labor are absorbed into the urban areas and industries. So the policymakers are confronted with the duplex task of providing affordable labor for emerging fields and ensuring the food self-sufficiency. So we choose this as the topic of our research. And whether migration can boost growth in the migrant sending areas has been heatedly discussed. There are optimistic views. They think the migration improves productive investment from the remittance, bring back expertise and technological change. And there are also pessimistic view, think that migration will exacerbate labor shortages and triggers a social and cultural breakdown. This research is based on the new economics of labor migration theory. They stated that both negative and positive impacts are produced during the migration. The negative effects are called lost labor effect, and the positive impacts are reached from the migrant income, which will help families to overcome liquidity constraints. The Melm theory has been applied into the research of connections between migration and income growth, and migration and income distribution, and the inequality and environment pollution. So these are the topics of the application of the theory of Melm. Our study contributes to the field in the three aspects. First, this research is the very few study that investigates the heterogeneous impacts of migration and migrant earnings on land efficiency from the perspective of rural household heterogeneity and differentiation. The differentiation are from these two aspects. One is the different types of migration. We separate the migration into seasonal migration and permanent migration. And another aspect is that different amounts of household wealth. And the study further analyzes the impact of the migration and migrant earnings on land efficiency with evidence gathered through an empirical study in China. Here is the theoretical framework. We have two hypotheses. The first is migration could negatively affect land efficiency. But we assume that the negative effect is heterogeneous between seasonal migration and permanent migration. You see the negative impacts of migration on land efficiency is mainly produced by the rural-urban migration of the lost labor. Or when a family sends out migrants, it is considered as a loss of human resource, which will change the labor quality of the rural areas from adult male members to female, child, and elderly members, which will decreases the appropriate use of the technology because of the lower education or other reasons. And also this will cause the negligence of production and the reduction of family labor import. And this lost labor effect can be heterogeneous because we separate the migration into seasonal migration and permanent migration. As for the seasonal migration, they consume food at home. Also, they return home regularly and take care of farm work when they are off from their off-farm employment. But for the permanent migration, they don't go back to their rural home frequently, but they will generate more income to the rural families. So we assume that these lost labor effects are different. And here is the second hypothesis. We think migrant earnings result in higher land efficiency, but the positive effect falls with an increase in household wealth. The positive impacts are gained by the migrant earnings with two aspects. The first is the migrant earnings that the migrants send back to the rural families will have the compensating effect and the risk reducing effect. The compensating effect will act as a financial intermediaries, which will loosen the financial constraints on high return activity. And the risk reducing effect acts as an insurance mechanism, which will diverse the household income sources. So they will encourage the households to undertake the unproven but probably more productive investments and reduce the exposure to agricultural shocks and change agricultural patterns. So these are the two mechanisms that will positively affect the land efficiency. And the heterogeneous effects comes from the different initial asset holdings. For the households with more wealth, they face less capital and risk constraints. So the positive effect can be lower or smaller. And the households with more wealth, they might deepen the incentives to work of remaining family members and decrease the opportunity cost of leisure. So they would, with more wealth, they might spend more time on leisure instead of agricultural production. But for the households with less wealth, they face stronger, they face severe capital and risk constraints. So the positive effects can be larger. These are the hypotheses of the research. And our data is collected from a field survey in a face-to-face interview, which is conducted from 2016 to 2018. We did this field survey in 6 provinces of China, in the eastern and western and the middle of the China. There are around 800 households that are interviewed by our group. And first, we can look at the overall effect of the migrant and migrant earnings. We divide the households into 3 groups. In the first and second group, families with migrants have lower land efficiency than those without, and households with more migrant earnings generate lower land efficiency than those with less. And next, we will look at the empirical strategy. This is the models we use. Y denotes the household land efficiency, is our dependent variable. It is measured by the annual output per mu of land. This is the measurement of the land in China. So, and the key variables is migration. MP represents the count of permanent migrants, and the MS represents the count of seasonal migrants in every family. And E is the sum of migrant earning made by migrants who work in urban regions. And here is an interaction term. And the W is the amount of contracted land in mu, which presents for the household wealth. ZY is the variable which controls for the variables explain land efficiency, such as agriculture land import, labor import, and land plots, machinery, and landfall. This is the second foundation. The migrant earning is decided by the migration and other control variables. ZE is the variable which controls for the variables explaining the migrant earnings. It includes like social network, their job training, and working experience, and so on. MP is the variable of the permanent migrants. It's ZP and ZS controls for variables explaining the seasonal and permanent migration. And the this is wrong. IE, IP, and IS are the IVs of the variables. Here are the descriptive statistics of all the variables. These are the dependent and independent variables of the model, and these are the control variables of each equation. We also deal with the problem of endogeneity. We have 3 IVs for the variables. IE is the IV for migrant earning, which is measured by the average earnings per migrant among families at the village level. And IP is the ratio of families with permanent migrants to the entire count of families in the village. And IS is the ratio of families with seasonal migrants to the entire count of families in the village. So these 3 variables are all from the village level, which is strong connected to the independent variable, but not directly connected with the dependent variable. And let's see the results. First is the migration equation. This is the result of the these two foundations. We can find that some factors have significant impacts on the seasonal migration and permanent migration, such as families with better conditions of the house will induce a negative effect on the participation in the seasonal migration. And if a family rents out of land or they have a stronger social network working, they will have more seasonal migration, and larger families are found to have higher tendency to send out both seasonal and permanent migration. But for households which has more children and the elderly are less willing to have permanent migrants, which is probably because they need to take care of them. So they usually choose seasonal migration instead of permanent migration. And next is the regression results for land efficiency. We run the model into two methods. The first is 2SLS regression, and the second is recursive system regression. We can see the impact of migrants on land efficiency is all negative, and significant. So we can see migration leads to the negligence of production, and it has a negative impact on family labor input. And then we separate the migrants into seasonal migrants and permanent migrants, and run the models again. And we can see that both seasonal and permanent migration has negative and significant effects on land efficiency. And then we did equality of coefficients test for the regressions to see if the coefficients are different from each other. The results shows that seasonal migrants and permanent migrants, they have no, the coefficients are not significantly different from each other. So the negative effects are almost the same for seasonal and migration, seasonal and permanent migration, which is different from our hypothesis. We assumed that the seasonal migrants were expected to return to rural home regularly, which will contribute more labor to the agricultural production than the permanent migrants. But the result is not the same, because we find that the seasonal migrants, they do not participate in agricultural activities when they are back into their rural home. There are three situations. First, the seasonal migrants are forced to go back to the rural areas because they can't find long-term job. So if they can find long-term job and to become permanent migrants, they will do that, but they can't, so they have to go back to their rural homes. And when this happens, they will find other off-farm jobs instead of agriculture. So their contribution to the agriculture is very limited. And the second situation is that the seasonal migrants, they choose to go home, but they come back home for the reasons such as taking care of their young children or educating school-age teenagers, and so they don't participate in agriculture as well. In addition, their offsetting and risk-reducing effect endangered by migrant earnings could also be smaller because they have less stable employment in industries. So that's why the effect is almost the same for seasonal and permanent migrants. And next, we look at the heterogeneous effect of the migrant earnings. We can see from all the regressions that the migrant earnings has positive and negative and significant effect on land efficiency. We include the interaction term, but the result is not constant across the two different regressions. So we will need to deal with it in another way. Later, we have to decide and or test the impact heterogeneous if the household's initial assets holdings are different. We divide the households into 3 wealth groups. The wealth group is classified by the variable of contract rural land. So the first group are the households with contract rural land less than 1.4 mu. And the second group is divided, and the third group is divided as this. And we run the regression with the first wealth group as a baseline. And we found that the coefficients are negative and significant, which implies that the positive influence of migrant earnings is significantly smaller for households in the second group, and even smaller in the third group. And in particular, families with less household wealth have a stronger positive impact from migrant earnings than those with more wealth. So the result is that if a household has more assets, it will has less positive impact from migrant earnings. So these are the overall conclusions of our research. Firstly, the migration has a significant negative impact on land efficiency, but this impact will be offset by the positive impact of migrant earnings. Secondly, though seasonal and permanent immigration both affect land efficiency negatively, but there is no significant difference between the two migration types. And thirdly, the positive effect of migrant earnings of households with less wealth on land efficiency is stronger than that of families with more wealth. And what can the supporters do? As a negative effect of migration on land efficiency is observed, measures should be taken in developing local labor market through which migration households can replace the migrant members by hired labor to offset the negative impact of labor laws. And as the migrant earnings positively affect the improvement of land efficiency, the introduction of preferential policies to encourage farmers to invest more earnings in technologies that enhance productivity, such as new seeding, fertilizing with higher efficiency and mechanization. And the positive impact of migrant earnings on land efficiency of households with less wealth is stronger. We should provide special financial support, such as grants, subsidies, and loans for low-income rural households, because these households has stronger marginal effects of the financial support. And thanks for your time.
Thank you very much, Sudan. This is the only paper that talks about the rural urban migration and the land efficiency. So I think many of you, if you are interested in this subject, may have questions for Sudan later on. So this is now open for anyone if they have questions for all the presenters. If not, then I will ask the first one. I actually have questions for all three presenters. The first one for Mattia. I just wanted to know a bit more about your methodology for your GPI calculations, the Government Presence Intensity Index, because usually people would look at like financial support, the government policies, and what else are in your considerations, the components of your calculations that is specific to China. Like, do you include the number of party members, for example, in the Board of Governance as one of the criteria there? So just wanted to know a bit more about how the methodology works. The second question for Cintia is, I just wanted to learn a bit more about the aspect on the competitiveness planning in your presentation. The meaning for competitiveness planning, does it mean to help the enterprises themselves to be more competitive, or is it the central government way of planning of putting provinces, the local governments themselves into competition? So just want you to explain a little bit more about that. The last question for Sudan is, yes, the land efficiency, the outcomes of your research. One thing that I noticed is that you said households with seasonal migrants and with permanent migrants, the difference in the land efficiency is not too much, but still in your calculation, it's actually shown that the seasonal migrants actually have worse land efficiency than the permanent migrants. Yeah, households with seasonal migrants actually have worse land efficiency than those with permanent migrants. So I don't know if there's any explanation to that side, because people generally think that if you are seasonal, at least you would go back to your own farm and do a bit of farming and provide your own food. But it seems like your calculations show that this kind of activity is actually not making the land more efficient, actually is comparatively worse. And the other aspect is the land use rights. I don't know if you have looked at, for example, the renting out of the land use rights. Does it have any impact on the land efficiency? Because if the rural households, they are renting this out to some maybe professional managers for agribusiness, does it improve the land efficiency sufficiently, or has it been looked at? So these are my questions. And Paul, yes, your hand is up. Please unmute yourself.
Yes, thanks very much. I would like to ask a question about Mattia. And what we hear about China investing in Africa, in Italy, in Latin America, and the Belt and Road Initiative, but we don't hear a breakdown, at least I don't, of which of those investments are state-owned enterprises and which are private, and if they are private, how much are they constrained by governmental policies? In other words, I'd like to hear more about breaking down China's investments abroad, comparing the type of enterprise that's making the investments. Thank you.
So I probably understand the second question, but I started with the first.
Okay, just want to make sure anyone else have any questions before we get back to the panelists. If not, then Mattia, would you mind just coming to the front? Yes.
Okay, related to the first question, thank you very much. Obviously, the methodology for building a composite indicator could allow to include an infinite number of variables. So the suggestion to include, for example, the amount of investment of the government in these enterprises is quite good. Also including a proxy for measuring, for instance, the control of the government through the people of the party and so on. The problem is that it's not easy to collect data for China, and for this first step of our empirical investigation, we consider only 5 variables that are related to the number of state-owned enterprises in the sector. When the number of enterprises is high, means that the government presence is quite high. We consider the total asset of these enterprises, since they could be small or big, so the number is not enough to say if the government is really in the sector or not. And considering the total asset of these enterprises, we have an idea of the amount of capital, basically. We consider the business revenue, the revenue of the state-owned enterprises in the sector. If the revenue are high, we can assume that the businesses and enterprises are working, are doing very well in the industries. The same for the total profits. That is another variable included in the composite indicator. And the annual average of employees. That means to consider not just the performance of in terms of revenue and profits and asset of the enterprises, but also the ability of these enterprises to employ people and to create jobs and so on. The higher the average of employees employed in the industry, the higher the relevance of that of the state-owned enterprise in the sector. Basically, this could be an idea. Using just one variable is not enough for really describing the presence of the government in the sector. And we start with building a composite indicator with these 5 variables. But for sure, could be interesting collect data for the money invested by the government or for other mechanisms through which the government is controlling the sectors, for sure. This is a preliminary exercise, a preliminary empirical experiment. Paul, thank you very much for your question, but I'm not sure to have understand if you could a bit rephrase since the audio was not otherwise someone understood the
Oh, would you mind repeating your question? Sorry. Is it about Belt and Road Initiative? Did you say something like that? Or...
Yeah, is the question about the Belt and Road Initiative?
It's not only about that, but it could be just that. If you want to break it down to just one area, Latin America or Africa or Belt and Road, I'm just trying to understand better. Is it the state-owned enterprises that are making these investments, or is it private enterprises that are making these investments abroad, outside China?
Yeah, okay, now understood. The question is really interesting since it describes the real approach of the government to the foreign policy, basically, and to the ability of China to invest abroad. Is that ability affected by the government intervention and industrial policy? The answer is obviously yes, I think. I'm not sure if the mechanism is through the state-owned enterprises that personally invest abroad on this kind of initiative, or if the government is supporting private enterprises that are investing in the international market. I don't know, and it's interesting in the future for us to investigate this aspect related not just to the domestic policy and the strategic relevance of the state-owned enterprises for the structural adjustment of the Chinese economy, but also will be important to investigate how the internal dynamics affect the ability of China to invest abroad. This is completely it's an extremely interesting topic, but for now I didn't explore this point. Thank you, Paul, for the suggestion for future research agenda.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Cynthia, do you want to come back to the question raised?
Okay. Can you repeat the question, please?
For competitiveness planning, can you explain a little bit more about what do you mean? Is it the government making the enterprises more competitive by investing more in R&D, or is it using competition between the local governments to make it more efficient in the way of planning?
Well, let me see if I get you. I agree it's not clear in the presentation, and also it's not clear in our research yet, because we are trying to understand, first of all, the relations of development. And in this sense, I forget to talk about the dependence theme in my presentation, because for us, competitiveness has to do with costs, okay, differentiation, okay, and specialization. But we are thinking about the scale, like a geopolitical scale, like if the country is more competitive, if they have relations more fluid, if they have the ability to establish relationships with other countries, establishing economical and political relations, and making this more fluid. So in this sense, I think that we are trying to understand competitiveness here as the ability of the country in the geopolitical scale the ability of the country to keep these relations, like define cost, define differentiation of products, and specialization in sectors or enterprises, and making the country like with the control of these decisions. Like we saw in the first presentation here, I think it's Tassinari. I don't know if this is the way I can say your name, but he was talking about these decisions of China after Trump push for a trade war, and this ability to create new strategies after suffer some push from other countries. For us, it can be an example of competitiveness, because in our understanding, Brazil is related to a concept of development, and yet still very dependent. We can't establish relations. We can't establish relations of economic and social discussions like China can do, and it has to do for us, of course, and with their system of innovation and with their ecosystem of innovation, because they are investing in different kinds of enterprises. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I think it has, for us, competitiveness in this case has more to do in a scale of the strategic decisions with central government than to local. We're not looking for the local scale now. We're looking for geopolitical state scale. I'm not sure if it's...
Yeah, I think you have. Thank you very much. So Sudan, can you come up with?
So for the questions that the seasonal migrants and the permanent migrants, they have the similar results in land efficiency. There are three reasons. First, many seasonal migrants go back to their home, not participate in agricultural production. First reason is they fail to find long-term jobs, so they are forced to go back to the rural areas. So when they go back, they usually look for other short-term off-farm employments instead of agriculture. And second is they so although they come back to go to the rural home, but they go back home for other reasons, like taking care of children or educating the school-age teenagers. And the permanent migrants are assumed that they leave the land and their rural areas, so the labor loss can be larger, but they compensated this by sending more remittance back to their rural home. So the families in rural areas can make up for the labor loss by hiring other laborers or do investments in more productive skills. So the overall effects are all similar. And with the second question is that we have considered the land reform of renting out the use right of the land. This is what we are doing right now, and we include the variable that's renting out land to the cooperatives in the area. So the result shows that it's the renting out land has a positive impact on land efficiency. So it's not for sure. We are still working on it. So, but the result is yes, it has positive effect on renting out land to the cooperatives.
Okay, thank you, Sudan.
Thank you.
Then maybe just one comment about the use of word then. Seasonal workers, maybe, because what you explained just now is that the people, even though they are in short-term employment, in non-farm employment, when they go back to the home farm, they actually are not involved in any agricultural activities.
Yes.
Because seasonal farmers looks to me like they would still farm it when it's the right season to farm.
Yeah.
So maybe need to find a different terms to describe this kind of, yes, that's people.
Maybe that's all.
Another thing, if I may ask you, Sudan, is because you have done your interview with the migrant workers.
Yes.
Because if I look at the figures, last time they published it, there are about 277 million migrant workers in China. That was quite a few years back. So the number of migrant workers is huge. I don't know what's the working population in Europe as a whole, but I think it's comparable, if not more. So these migrant workers, for those that you have interviewed, when they go to the city, where do they live, for example? How is the living conditions of the migrant workers? Is it very poor, very bad, like people have to live in slums, or because we know that they may not have the social welfare protection like the normal urban citizens? So what is the living conditions of the migrant workers that you have interviewed? Can you tell us a bit more about that?
It depends. We have the living conditions depends across the migrants, because we interviewed migrants all over the mainland of China. So most of the migrants go to more developing areas. I guess the migrants in Zhejiang and Jiangsu, they have better conditions, even when they are at rural home. So these areas are more developed. And with the migrants from Hunan and Hubei and Sichuan, so I guess their conditions are not so good. And but we ask some questions about the social security, like the medical security. It's good to know that in the rural areas, around 97% of the citizens are they have the medical security. So the conditions has developed a lot better than the past decades. So there are still some aspects to be improved, but it's improving.
Where do they live then in the city? Do they live in social housing, or they have to rent it?
Most of them renting.
Okay, they are afford to rent.
Maybe very bad conditions.
Some of them.
Yes, yeah, some of them.
Any other questions? Okay. So I think we will finish it here now then, if there's no more questions. Yes. Thank you very much for joining us and staying till the end. Today is the last session of the China panel, and we hope we don't need to wait till another year to organize something like this for discussion, but I hope you found these 3 days have been good and you learned something about it. So thank you to all the presenters again, and hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.